Hello, I'm Dr. Karis Masserell, and I'm an emergency physician. I'm here today to talk to you about a very important subject. That subject is impaired operation of a vehicle. As an emergency physician, every day I work, I see the consequences of people making bad decisions. And one of those bad decisions that people make is to drive a vehicle when they're impaired. And it's important to remember a vehicle isn't simply a car. A vehicle can be a bicycle, it can be a motorbike, it can be a motorboat, it can be a jet ski. Anything that that is motorized or you're using power to move is a vehicle. And when you are impaired and driving a vehicle, you are at high risk for causing harm, not just to yourself, but to other people. Can you imagine what it's like to be an emergency physician working in a department when somebody comes in who's been injured severely by an impaired driver? Think about what we have to do. Sometimes I have to go and tell parents, family members, children that their loved one has died. I've never met this family before, yet I'm going to tell them the worst thing that they can imagine and make it the worst day of their life. And it's all because of a decision that you made. A selfish decision to get into a vehicle when you were impaired and drive that vehicle. So what will happen when you come into the ER? Well, you'll be brought into a very bright, very cold, very sterile room. You'll be surrounded by strangers who will be yelling all sorts of things that don't make sense to you. And then we're going to start doing things to you. Some of the things we might do to you would be things like putting in large objects like chest tubes. Let me just show you what a chest tube looks like. This is the chest tube. If you have blood or air in your chest, sometimes we'll put this into your chest in order to get rid of that air or that blood. Sometimes we will put a large breathing tube down your throat to help you breathe. Sometimes we'll put large IVs into major vessels in your neck to get fluid and blood into you. And sometimes we'll put things like catheters into your bladder. Sometimes, because you're so impaired, we'll actually tie you down to the bed so you don't harm yourself. These are some of the things that can happen to you when you come to the ER. Sometimes even lesser things, which are quite humiliating. It's not the first time I've had a teenager wake up in the morning who's been tied to a bed, who's soiled themselves, who has a catheter going into their bladder, and then they have to face their parents. I don't think you want to be that teenager. When you're younger, often consequences don't seem to have meaning. And I think that's consistent with all young people. It doesn't make you unique, it just makes you young. And coming from me, an older person, sometimes you think, what does that older person really know? They're always going to tell me that there's consequences and I don't understand what they mean. But what I see are the real consequences of your actions. You might wonder, what happens to people? Well, if you're the offender who's driving the vehicle while impaired, you may suffer severe or life-threatening injuries yourself, or you may very well be killed. But what if you survive this accident? What might be some of the consequences? Well, you might be left with a lifelong injury that impairs your ability to do the job you want to do the things you want to do the activities you want to do. Things that you loved to do before, like play hockey, like run, like swim, you may no longer be able to do because of the consequences of the actions that you took. Your parents. Think about what might happen to your family. I can guarantee you, if a major injury or somebody has been killed by your actions, the family of that victim will sue your family. And your family may or may not have enough insurance to cover it. But if they don't have enough insurance to cover it, maybe your family will lose their house. Maybe your parents might lose their jobs. Your parents might split up because of the stigma associated with the actions that you've taken. Ultimately, again, these are actions that are in your control. This is not something that just happened by accident. This is something you caused. What happens if you get charged? Well, if you're 18, impaired driving is a criminal offense in every province and territory in Canada. Recent changes to the law make it much harder for you to get a pardon. If you have a criminal record, think about some of the consequences. Try and cross an international border with a criminal record. Try and get a passport with a criminal record. Try and get a job with a criminal record. You're going to read about it. You're going to hear about it. You're going to feel the consequence of this action for the rest of your life. Sometimes it can lead to serious mental health issues. Sometimes people become very depressed. And sometimes, even in the worst cases, people become suicidal. Often you might hear people talk about the legal limit of impairment. And yes, in Canada and all our provinces, we have legal limits of impairment, and they actually differ from province to province. But what I want to tell you is that impairment occurs when you take any substance that changes your level of consciousness. And those are all substances, not just alcohol. For example, prescription drugs that your parents might have that you might not take, but you might take from your parents, such as narcotics, such as sleeping pills. Other drugs of abuse that we know people take, marijuana. It may seem like a fun drug, but it impairs your ability to drive. Other drugs such as ecstasy, crack cocaine, and even the newer drugs like bath salts, all impair your ability to operate a vehicle. And so what we say is that no level of impairment is safe. One of the things I know as young people that you feel, and I was young once too, and I know I felt the same way, is that this will never happen to me. Because you assume at a young age, you don't see a lot of bad things happening to people. Or you hear about them, but they're not personal to you. But let me reassure you, all you need to do is go to a trauma ward or a rehab ward at any major hospital, and it will be filled to capacity with young people who have suffered severe life-altering injuries because of choices they made or because of choices that were forced upon them by other people who made bad choices. If you do this, you'll realize that not only does it happen to young people, but it could happen to you, it could happen to your best friend, it could happen to a family member. And you really need to think about this, because if, again, you make the selfish decision to drive while impaired, then you can cause harm and injury to another human being or to yourself. And I really urge you to think about that. And I really urge you to take the right decision. And that right decision is not to drive a motor vehicle or any other kind of vehicle when you're impaired. We put together this program to let you hear real stories about the real outcomes of impaired driving. We hope that by listening to them, you'll realize that this does happen, and it could happen to you too.